we're going to talk about applicant screening. And this is actually one of my favorite topics to discuss. And I hope, you get something new out of it today. I'm going to talk first a little bit about the importance of screening, and then we're going to go into the details of how to do the screening within the system, and then talk about some of the different things that can support your screening process. So that's kind of the overview for today. I know Sherry would get really mad at me if I didn't go over some of the, the why and the right way to screen at the beginning. So we're going to start with that. When we're hiring, we need to be able to validate why, we have validate our hiring. So it all needs to be, that's the right word, I'm already stumbling and it just started. Let me start up. So in the EEOC rules, all activities associated with recruitment and selection have to be validated, or, there needs to be some justification of why we're doing what we're doing when it comes to hiring. And there are 3 types of validity: criterion-related validity, construct validity, and content validity. And the first 2 are not practical for a school district, but content validity is very doable for a school district and is actually pretty easy. And I'm just going to briefly talk about what that is, and then we'll kind of go in and learn about screening. So if I can get my slide to go to next. Content validity is based on the measurement of content. So like, the job functions or the requirements, and it's really easy to obtain. And you do that through a job analysis process. And a job analysis is just collecting and making judgments about the knowledge, the skill, and ability someone needs to have to do a particular job. Answers a couple questions, what is the function of this job? What does it take to do this job? What's the knowledge, the skills, and the abilities, those KSAs? What environment exists to do this job, and are there any prerequisites required? So when you're posting jobs and writing job descriptions, these are all those things that go into that process. We need to answer those questions. And it also pertains over to the screening side of things. And so when you're getting ready to do your screening, you need to ask yourself, what type of screening are we going to do? And specifically with the system, there's 2 types. We're going to talk about those in just a second: file screening, job screening. And another question you want to ask yourself, is your screening going to be different based on your positions? Because you can do that, And then the big thing is, what is the criteria you're going to use while you're screening to make sure that you're getting that validity met? And so after you've kind of had that discussion, what type of screening you want to do, how we're going to screen and what's our criteria, then you're able to identify data within your online application system to help answer some of those screening questions. And hopefully this makes sense as we kind of go forward. Your online application is a giant database, and we ask applicants to provide us information, and we can take that same information and use it in our screening process. Typical things that we ask an applicant, they provide a resume or a letter of interest, or we might have a job-specific addendum or any other type of supplemental information to give us an idea of that person's knowledge or skills or abilities related to that position. And then, or references. All those are things that that get put into systems. So like a teacher, they need to have some educational components in order to hire them, like a certificate. So that's data they're going to put into the system. So you, in theory, can take that data and compile it in a way that you can use it in your screening process, like through a report, like a custom report. Hopefully that makes sense. Have I lost anybody? Kind of the why and the how of screening before we actually show you how to screen in the system. Okay. So criteria. When you're setting up your job descriptions or your screening and stuff, you need to determine your criteria for every position, and typically HR develops that criteria, and then they have other people help review it. Typically those are people that work in that similar position. So if you're writing a paraeducator job description and then you're going to do screening for a paraeducator, it's important to have people that have actually done the job have some input on like the job description or the screening process. And the criteria really needs to reflect that job analysis, so the skills, the knowledge, and the abilities, and the functions of a job. And the most important thing when it comes to screening is that you're using the same set of criteria for every candidate for that position. You know, you're not just screening, having different sets of criteria. You need to be consistent just to keep yourself out of any trouble down the line. Okay, so that's all the boring stuff. Now let's actually talk a little bit about screening specifically in the system. So I have taken a sample of file screening from a particular district, and I want to talk a little bit about how they do it to make sure that they're being consistent within their screening. So they've taken the job description for the particular job, and they've looked, you know, they've broken up into their criteria that they're going to screen now against that. And one of the areas is going to be, they're going to look at the application materials. They also want to look at, you know, the person's education. They've decided experience is an area they want to look at, confidential recommendations and recommendations. And so this is how they've set it up in the system. But in addition to this, they provide their screeners with rubrics that really break down what they're looking for in each of these different areas. And so if we start with application materials, they've given it a score of 1 to 4. But if we go to the next slide, this is what they give those screeners so they understand what a 4 really looks like versus a 1. So when you're screening, you know, they tell them if their cover letter's concise, is their resume professional, is their application organized, versus someone who, you know, their letter's really vague, or it doesn't convey any interest, or it's poorly written and there's lots of typos. So that's what they provide their screeners so that they get consistent ratings when they're screening. So another area we could look at is maybe education and training. So if we skip ahead a couple slides, here is the rubrics that they would give their screeners to kind of define what does appropriate, you know, how do you decide if you're going to give them a 1, 2, 3, or 4. So a 4, you know, they have the appropriate education for this position or certification, and it shows that they're highly skilled. Or someone who you'd give a 1, you know, they might have the minimal amount of education and minimal amount of skills and training for the position. And if you take the time when you're setting up your screens to also set up some type of roadmap for your screeners, it's going to lead to what we like to call rating consistency. And by using look-fors or a structured rating scale, it's going to reduce the error of differences between screeners, or reduce the likelihood of differences or errors between your screening. So if you had 3 people screen the same person and they have that same rubric, they're going to get pretty similar scores. And when you find that you have higher inter-rater relatability, now that's a tongue twister, you end up getting a likelihood of a more successful hire because you've defined what you're looking for, you've got your criteria, you've got your look-fors in the job and everything, and you've made a roadmap for your people to follow to help you really find, to screen people so it fits within that roadmap. So you can look for those that are qualified and those aren't. I don't know if that makes sense. I hope that makes sense. But that's kind of the big thing I want to get at. When you're setting up your screens, you know, take the time to set up your criteria. Let it be meaningful and thoughtful, that it's related to those job descriptions. You know, it really looks at what the person needs to know to do the job, the abilities they're bringing to the job, and all that. Does that make sense? Hopefully. Okay, so after all you've done that, then it comes to really, how are you going to use your system for screening? And within the online application, there are 2 types of screening you can do. One is job screening, and the other is file screening. File screening stays with the applicant's file, where job screening stays with the job. And hopefully, when I teach you how to do each time that, or teach you how to do each type of screening, that makes a little more sense. But file screening, say an applicant applies for a job and they're screened by a screener, and then sometime down the road they apply for another job, that other screener will see that previous screening information. It's going to be right there. And in the file screening side of things, you can have as many file screens as you want for an applicant. There's no limit. And it can be a nice way to share information across your district. Maybe, you had a really great candidate apply for a paraeducator position, but there was a better candidate, that ultimately got the job, and that person then applies for another position at a different building. They can see what that other screener principal had to say about them, and they would, see that they're a good, see what things they had to say. So Diane asked a question, can the applicant see the screening? No, it's all on the management side of things. So any screening details that you add to an applicant lives within underneath that management tab, so the applicant would not have any access to that. I hope that answers your question. There's also job screening, and so that you look at that as we're posting a position. We've got this maybe this secretarial position for like the superintendent or whatever. All that screening is tied to that particular job number, and only if you go to the job screening tab will you ever see that. It's not going to get added to each applicant's file. It's as the job. And there's pros and cons to both, and some districts do one or the other, or they do a combination of both. And if you want to have a conversation with the support team or even Sherry, she can really talk with you about, why you might do one or the other. And just know that we're here to facilitate that. But I also think one of the most important tools at your disposal when you are screening is reports. And a lot of districts have created custom reports to help aid them in the screening process. So it's a way to take that data that applicants are adding to their application anyway and put it into an easy way to read and access, and I'll show you what I mean in just a few more slides of what a good custom report might look like to help your people screen and get some of those answers to those criteria right there on that single report. I see Deb, you joined us. Anything you want to add before I move on to showing them how to do the file screen, Deb? I'm going to take that as she doesn't feel like she needs to add anything. She might be on the other line. She gets busy. Okay, so let's talk about file screening and what's it look like. So when you file screen, you start by going to the Applicant Management tab and selecting Applicant Search. So anybody that has a Supervisor 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 role has access to Applicant Search. And in theory, if you turn on file screening, can file screen and see other people's file screens. So when you get to Applicant Search and you pull up your job or however you want to find your people, there's a column right here that says FS, and that stands for File Screen. If you see this caution symbol, that means there's no data associated with this applicant. And if you see the file folder, that means there is data associated with that applicant. And if I wanted to do a file screen, so maybe for this Cap Carpenter, I would simply start by clicking on that icon to take us to the file screen menu. And when you get there, it looks a little bit like this. And the very first thing you do to start adding a file screen to an applicant's file is press the little add button, add file screen. And then it's going to open another screen that looks like this. And this is where you're going to select what type of file screen you want to add to that applicant's report or applicant's file. So you're going to press the add button again. And it's going to give you a drop-down screen, and you can choose the type of file screen. You can have as many screens as you want. You can make it very specific by position, or you can have, I have some districts that have screening for interviews, and then after they've interviewed, they screen again for, of those people interviewed, to say who they would think is a good hire or not, specifically like with sub positions. So you can get real creative on how you use those screens. So after you've selected the screen, You're going to be able to add comments or not. It's up to you. If you want to do it right there, you can add them later. And you're going to save your screen. And it's going to flash. Your screen's going to flash. And right here is where you have to do one more step in order to record a score. And you're actually going to click on the file screen, and the scoring window will open. And whatever your screen looks like will open down here, and you can go in and add your numbers and save your steps. It's kind of cumbersome. We know that. And we've finally gotten through to the programming team that you shouldn't have to click add, or whatever 3 times to get to this screen. So during our spring update, this is one of our high priorities, that they're going to be modifying this particular section of the jobs portal to make this a one-step process. We've just been doing a lot of work on employee records, and there's an area in employee records where you add evaluation data, and it's going to mimic the process over there and make it less clicking. So it'll make it easier on your screener. So know that that is coming. But for now, we're kind of stuck with the way it is here, but it will be updated and improved in the springtime. So I can go in here and I can put in my scores, and I would save my work. And after I save my work, it'll flash and you'll see a record of your data. You have the option, if you wanted to look at it in detail, by clicking the magnifying glass, and it'll open a screen like this, and you'll see right away any data that you've entered. It's going to first off identify who the screener was and the date they added the screening, any comments that were added, and the score that they added to that particular applicant. And you'll notice there's room for up to 5 people to add input on an individual screen. And they can do that, and it will average data over time. And it'll list, if there was a second person, they'd be listed down this way. And when you're done, you just click that magnifying glass, or click the little X to close it. And it'll bring you back to the screen. You also could, in theory, come in here and make changes if you needed to edit your file screen. Something to note, that only the person that added the file screen has the ability to edit it. So maybe you made a mistake on the scores, or you wanted to go back and add an additional comment. Maybe you screened someone, and after interviewing, you're like, I really want to add a little comment here. You could come back and edit your file screen by simply coming in here and clicking that edit button. Okay. And when you're all done with this screen, all you have to do is press return, and it'll take you back to applicant search. And you could, in theory, go ahead and screen the next applicant on your list. When you're on this screen, if you click the summary button and open the applicant summary after you've added a file screen, it will be added to the bottom of that report. So when other people are in here looking at applicant summaries, they would see any additional file screens that have been added, previously. We do have a couple districts that choose to hide that information because they don't want because HR does all the file screening, and they're pretty selective on what they want the hiring managers to see or not see. So if that was an issue for you guys, that is easily modified. Does that make sense? And I'm going to send you nice directions that walk through all those steps on how to add a file screen. Or any questions about file screens? So after you've done your file screens, just know that anytime you can actually come back and search for applicants by file screen. So you could see it anybody, like if you could run a job and say, who has a classified file screen for this particular job, and it'll filter to only show the people that have that file screening completed. You can also even be more specific and ask it to show you scores. So people that have a 20 or greater, and to weed out the people that scored lower on their file screen. So you have that ability under applicant search to filter your data by file screen or score of a file screen. Okay, so that's file screening. Job screening. Like I said, job screening lives with the job, file screening lives with the applicant. In order to file or job screen, you would go to the applicant management menu, hover over that, and select Job Screening. Only people that have the role of job screen or screener, I can't remember exactly what the role is called right now, will have access to this menu item. So it's not an automatic thing. And you can also be very selective. You can have lots of people go to applicant search and see applicants if you choose to, but then you can be even more selective over who you want to give the ability to do job screening for. If you have an HR admin role or HR district admin role, you're going to see this no matter what as well. So when you get to job screening, of course, you're going to first start by picking the interest type of the job you want to screen. So on my example here, I've clicked on classified, and it's going to show me all my classified jobs. And then the next thing I want to do to start the process is I'm going to click on the pencil to actually go in and start adding applicants that I want to screen for this particular job. Okay. I go and I would click on that pencil, and this little window is going to open. And right away, I get to decide if I want to just select individually the applicants I want to screen, or if I want to screen all the applicants that applied to this job. So that's what these two different buttons stand for. Okay. So if I click all applicants, the next thing I would have to do is pick which screen I want to do. So which type of screen I want to associate with this job. So if this is my attendance secretary job, I'd probably pick my clerical screen, and then I would save it. And what it does, and it's added 3 applicants to this job. And if I want to see the list of those applicants that actually go into screen them, I've got to expand the view by clicking the plus sign. And the screen will look like this. So for this particular job, I had 3 applicants apply because I went ahead and clicked all applicants. And if I want to, when it comes time to do the screening for each individual applicant, I would start by clicking the pencil to open that applicant's record. On a side note, right here is that applicant summary. So if you needed a quick list of their summary, like their education and everything, you could open that. When Sherry talks about job screening, she teaches people to use 2 screens, and on one screen they've got the job screening menu open, and on their second screen they would have applicant search, so they could read the references or they could look at all the different documents that have been attached to that particular applicant's record. So I'm going to click the pencil, and I want to screen this para poly, and this opens. So the first thing is I would go in and I would rate my applicant based on my screening criteria and my rubric. And then you have the option to mark this person as screen okay. And what that means is this applicant is okay to move on in the process for this position. So this person, they meet kind of those minimal, they meet the criteria we set up to be screened for this position. And, I might want to interview them. So that's what that screen okay stands for. And then if you wanted, you could add comments to support your decision of, why you want to screen, that you mark them okay or whatever, you say, they're a strong applicant, they've got good references, whatever you want to put in there, and then you can save it. And you would repeat the process for all the applicants that need to be screened. And when you're done and you come back to the screen, you can see right away who did I mark okay and who didn't I mark okay. And then you would return back to the job screen menu. And when you're back on this screen, after you've screened that job, you have the option to run a couple reports to kind of review and view the results of your screening. The one that's under the S column stands for score, so it's going to rate those applicants by highest to lowest score received. And then the one under A just lists the applicants alphabetically. So if I were to click that PDF icon and open it for a job that I've completed screening on, it's going to look something like this. So here's my paraeducator job. It's going to tell me right now the names, the different applicants, you're going to see them listed, if they were marked okay or not. It's also going to show me who screened this applicant, and just like on file screen, there's room for up to 5 scores. It's going to give you a total of all scores, a total by screener, and an average for the questions. And you can see like right here, this applicant scored a 31, this one scored a 30, and so on. So if I had a bunch of applicants, it's a quick way to kind of quickly rate, your higher versus lower applicants. Questions about job screening? I've muted you, so you feel free to unmute yourself. Does that make sense? I hope so. Oh, we're going to get to that, Diane. That's coming up. That's a great question. She wants to know how to set up the screens, and so we will talk about that in just a second. Okay. All right. A really important tool to help you with your screening is using reports within the system or having custom reports created for your system to aid you in your screening efforts. Reports are actually my favorite thing of all, even more than actually entering screening data. I like the fact that your online application is a database, and because of that, we can pull that data out and make it useful and meaningful to help us in our hiring endeavors. So you're going to want to go to Applicant Management, Applicant Reports to pull different screening reports. There are a couple stock reports on everybody's sites, but a lot of people are moving towards the more customized reports to help them. So if you're a district that uses file screens, there is a report called File Screen, and you can go in and pick your job, and you can pick your screens, and it's going to show you right away all the screens for the applicants, any scores, and who screened them. So that's one way you could look at your applicants and kind of see where they fall in the scheme of things. And all of these reports could be customized if you wanted. There's typically a fee involved with customization, but it really depends on what's getting customized and how much, and we can talk to you about that. But a big thing I like is districts that have taken the time to set up custom reports to help them in their screening process. So this is an example of a certificated screen from one of our districts, and they kind of sat down and talked about, well, what things at a glance that we could put on a report would be helpful to our administrators when they're looking at their pool and screening. And so here's an example. They list the name and they put in the status of the applicant, so they'll know right away, are they complete, incomplete, or pending. Since this is a certificated screen, they thought it was important to list their endorsements and their certificates, so they're both listed. And they also wanted to know their level of education. So that's listed here. And on this particular district, they also like to list what's missing from their checklist. So this wasn't the best example because everybody's complete, but on this screen, if they were incomplete, it would say what's incomplete. Maybe it's just they're missing references. And so that it would list that, or they didn't add their work experience or whatever. So they can tell right away who's really a really incomplete applicant, or someone who's just maybe missing one little thing, and that's why they're incomplete. Another thing that a lot of districts like to do is create a scale for their references so that there can be a quick, at a glance average. And the thing I like a lot about this district is they put their reference average scale saying 15 being excellent, so the highest score, or 5 being excellent. So it lets their screeners know right away that the highest score someone could get on their references is a 5, so it gives them an indication of which of these are strong and which ones might not be as strong. So on this, it shows the number of references that have been returned for this applicant and the average score. So if a 5 is a perfect score and they've got 4 references back and they're scoring at a 4.5 average, that's their references are pretty strong. Or like this person, they've got 3 returned and they're closer to a 2, so their references did not come back as strong as some of the other applicants that they're looking at. So that's something that may or may not help that screener, in the weeding down of their list of applicants to look at. Does that make sense? I hope it makes sense. They also on this district, indicate who's an employee, and on some of mine, they might even indicate who has that sub role. It could show up right here on that report. So they could quickly see, well, who's already working for us and who's a sub for our district. And that might also, help them with the screening process. I'm going to show you from a different district a sample of what they're using for their classified screening. So this district also, they list the applicant and the status. And then they wanted their level of education, so like an AA, high school diploma, GED, because it's a classified position. We're looking at a custodian here. And I don't know what these C1 stand for, but they do have a code on their district, and I just can't remember what it is. So their screeners know what that means. For this particular district, they wanted to know what the applicant listed as their job preferences. So like this person, Janice, you know, her preferences were as an educational assistant, but she's applying for a custodial job. You know, where this person, his first preference was he wants to be a custodian, and that may or may not influence that screener. I don't know. If that's important to your district, that is data that you ask an applicant. So in theory, it's data that can be included in a report. And they also went in and rated their references. I can't remember. They don't have a score on the bottom of theirs of what their references score, a good score is versus not. But I do know that they have taught their screeners what the score range should be. So that's a sample of a classified custom report. All right. Now let's talk about where do you go to set up your screening tables. So under your System Manager tab and the lookup tables, you know, we love those lookup tables. Under Applicant Tables, there's a table called Job Screens. And it stands for Job and File Screens. It's just, that was the shortest thing that fit as a title of a table. So you would go to the lookup tables, you would go to the Job Screen table, and when you open it, it's going to look like this, and it's going to list all of the screens that are currently on your system. And it's going to tell you, is it a file screen or a job screen? So basically, which menu is it going to show up under? File screens show up under Applicant Search, and they're associated with the applicant. Job screens show up under the job screen menu, and they're associated with the job rather than the applicant. You can also see if anything's been inactivated or not, so you're not using it anymore. To look at your criteria on an existing screen, you see this little caret, this arrow. If you click on it, it's going to turn down, and it's going to open all the subcategories associated with your screen. And this is where you could either add or edit what's already there. So I would go in, if I wanted to maybe have them sort in a certain order, I could come in and put in a sort. This is where you pick your minimum and your maximum scale. You also have the ability, you know, to delete anything or change it. To start from scratch, if you want to add a brand new one, you'll click the new item first, and then it's going to ask you if you want it to be a file screen or a job screen, and then you're going to give it a description or name. And after you've done that, then you can come in here and add the individual criteria under that. I hope that makes sense. Let's see, do I have anything next? And that's kind of it. That's applicant screening. Questions, thoughts